Welcome to Yell, Fight, Sooie, college football from three friendly-ish rivals.
Gentlemen, it is week 0. If there's a void between the end of college football, the national championship game, and week 0, it is over as of Saturday. Even though the slate of games is horrible, and you have to have a real disease to be watching even Notre Dame Navy. That might be the premier matchup this weekend. College football is officially back. This is Yell Fight Sooie. Introducing our hosts for season number 2. This gentleman in the Razorback gear, his Razorback blood runs thicker than the sap of the piney woods of Arkansas. Scott, Mixmaster Mac McIntyre.
I'm just mixing it up. Back in the piney woods, I guess. I don't even know there were piney woods in Arkansas, but
I had to look it up. There are.
There are. Okay, cool. Good to be here.
Confirmed.
Our Longhorn co-host, James Christopher, is so Austin he thought South Congress sucked before you had to back into Park. He's a proud alumnus, double degree from the University of Texas at Austin, James Christopher.
And I got the student debt to prove it, baby.
And me, well, I'm just patiently waiting to see if my personal membership in the Big Sky Conference is going to be accepted in this next wave of realignment. I'm not talking about Texas A&M. I'm talking about just me. I'm hoping that I get to go compete in the Big Sky Conference.
The Fighting Tom Chessons.
I will be the only football playing member. I know if A&M moves there, they're going to go 8-4 because that's just what we do. This is Yell Fight Sooie.
Well, gee, welcome back.
Wait. This is why I like Andy hosting. Who else pulls out sap from the East Piney Woods? I don't.
I looked it up. It's a real thing.
That's yeah. The crazy part is Andy was able to say sap from the East Piney Woods, and I think the biggest word was like 2 syllables. Usually there'll be a 5 or a 6 syllable word that he throws in there somewhere just to really confuse me. But not in this case. So that's
realize
great.
We're trying to draw more Arkansas audience to the show, so I wanted to talk small words.
I was going to say it's the off season for him too, Scott. It's the off season for him too. He's not stretched out yet, to use a baseball parlance.
Because good ears fans make.
I'm just surprised you're not excited about the Arkansas Pine Bluff Tulsa matchup the first weekend, Andy. I mean, that was just going to be riveting.
I will say it is a dog of a schedule, but I am happy college football is back. None of our teams are playing in week 0 because we're not Notre Dame or a bunch of Division II schools. But we all start next week. We wanted to take some time today to reacquaint ourselves with everyone, talk a little bit about what's going on in the offseason, and do a little season preview for each of our teams. Kicking it off, I still haven't heard from the Big Sky Conference. I am fingers crossed with the Patriot Conference too, maybe something, a little competition there. But everybody else is moving.
True Patriot Conference. The true Patriot. Oh, sorry. Good.
Not the true Patriot Conference. That's a whole different thing.
That's a whole
Everybody
different
else
show.
seems to be moving. And as of last night, it appears that Cal, Stanford, and SMU are potentially going to be members of the Atlantic Coast Conference as soon as next week. When does this merry-go-round stop? I'll start with you, Jim. We've had it feels like 100 teams have moved, and none of it's happening this year. It's all happening in 2024.
I mean, I think it stops whenever everybody looks at the landscape and realizes there's either a number of conferences that add up to 64, and they just decide they are whatever this new thing is, and then it goes, and then they break off from the NCAA altogether.
I think it doesn't stop until everybody has a home. Everybody that's a Power 5 school, that's a real Power 5 school right now. And you know, I mean, there's going to be some that get left by the wayside, and I think we're all aware of that. But once everybody has a new home in this land and this finishes, I think round 1 has finished. And then I'm really curious because, you know, we think about, you know, Cal and Stanford joining the ACC, like what you're talking about. And from a football standpoint, okay. So then make a trip to Clemson. I mean, you know, in this day and age with travel being what it is, it's not that big of a deal. But what about the tennis matches? What about the gymnastics matches?
Well, I mean, what about the baseball, softball, and basketball players who have to play during the week? Like tennis, usually you can play those on the weekends, but particularly basketball plays conference games during the week. Like, how do you rationalize that? I don't know. I think it's gotten sporty. Andy, if you would have told me, well, if you would have put a gun to my head at the end of our last season and said which one survives Big 12 or Pac 12 or Pac 14 or whatever it was, never in a million years would I have told you that it was the Big 12. And I think that just shows you how topsy-turvy and crazy it is.
And I think that's worth mentioning because we might have glossed over or buried the lead a little bit. Cal and Stanford are looking for a home because the Pac-12 will not exist in 12 months.
Mm-hmm.
They're down to 4 teams, 2 of which are actively shopping for a home, and 2 of which are probably going to be lucky to get into the Mountain West. Talking about Oregon State and Washington State. There is not a big demand to capture the Pacific Northwest market for even the Big 12. Although if there's a conference that could do it, I guess it's them because they could, pod them off with the Arizona teams and the Utah teams and maybe Colorado. And, at least you have some regional partners, as regional as that would be. But we left college football last year with a Power 5 and the Big 12 being the most tenuous member of that.
Yeah.
And we're now looking at a Power 4 because the Pac-12 won't exist after this year, at least as it stands now. And the ACC is kind of in jeopardy because you have teams like Florida State and Clemson basically saying that we could leave and not pay the grant of rights that's holding that conference together. And I think if you get 3 or 4 of the bigger schools in that conference who want to go to the SEC or go to the Big 10 or 12 or 14 or 16 or whatever the hell, can we just change the Big Ten's name at this point?
I think it's funny that we're all talking about institutes of higher learning that none of them can count. Like,
they are all very proud of their academic prowess. It's one of the things the Big Ten, even though they have Rutgers in their conference, but they can't count to 10. And I take your shoes off. You have other digits that you can use.
Maybe they have the Big 10, and then they're just not counting the other schools. Like they're the little few.
Like the Big 10 and
the Big 10 and they just don't say it. It's just known but not said. I think look, in all this realignment, I think we all agree right now the SEC and the Big 10 have positioned themselves better than anyone else. The Big 12 still have schools. Texas and Oklahoma are about to leave and come over to the SEC, and we'll see how the quality plays out over there. In the Big 12, the ACC is in that very tenuous position, though. Exactly what you talk about, Andy. If Clemson and Florida State and Miami and a couple, if 2 or 3 teams pull the plug and they bolt somewhere else, let's say they jump to the SEC to get the SEC up to 20 teams, the ACC falls apart. So there's a lot. The only location that you have right now that you feel safe is the Big 10 or the SEC, the Big 10 and then the SEC.
The frustrating thing too, Andy, is if the Big 12 had made some of these moves a little bit earlier, I don't know that Texas and Oklahoma leave. Like Texas and Oklahoma are ceding some degree of potential recruiting advantage by going to the SEC for the reasons we talked about when A&M went. That I don't know that they make those same choices if they know that the conference was going to survive and was going to add mid-tier, but upper mid-tier quality schools.
I will say this about the Big 12, and I know that's not exactly what we're talking. That to me looks like it's going to be a very fun conference. I don't think they're ever going to produce a national championship team. I just don't think they're constituted to do that with the membered schools they have. It could happen. I think it would be a very rare occurrence. I think you'll have a school like TCU that has an incredible season, makes a run, and then goes and faces somebody from the Big 10 and the SEC in a championship game and gets blown out of the stadium. I think that's the reality. Having said that, you've got a lot of fun, wide open offenses. You've got a lot of enough regional rivalries, and you've got enough new blood in there. It's a conference that Arizona State can come in and dominate from the very first day. And if you look historically at and I know that's one of the issues that I have with all of this, we'll get to in a second, but you look at a team like Arizona State, that's of the schools in the Big 12, that is the school that has the all-time winningest record, the most wins, and the best revenue of the schools in the Big 12 starting in 2024. So does Arizona State stop tripping over their own dicks like they have in the Pac-12 for the past,
No,
decades.
so many Arizona State records are inflated from them being an independent
Border conference.
80s also. Yeah.
Are you bringing up the border conference?
Well,
Texas Tech loves the border conference.
But Andy, what you're saying, is speaking to what I was saying too earlier. Like all of a sudden, the Big 12 has decided that they can have an identity and they can have a brand. When I felt like once A&M left, they were like that guy that got dumped who just wandered around the city. They were Lloyd Dobler at the near the end of Say Anything with the voice, like just listlessly going, "She gave her my heart, I gave her a pen." Like,
were they all null and void, Jim?
They were, yeah. They were sitting at the gas and sip with no women anywhere around. But
conscious choice.
But
it's a conscious choice to play in the Cotton Bowl.
Exactly. So I don't know. It's frustrating as somebody who, I think it looks like it will be a lot of fun, and I think it's frustrating. I don't know how Scott feels from being a further distance, but for me.
Well, I mean, it looks like exactly what Andy called it out. It's going to be a fun conference to watch in the years to come, kind of like what the Pac-12 was back in the day, or what the WAC was. If you really want to go back a little bit, when you had BYU and games would start at 7:30 and end at 12:30 in the morning with some astronomical score, and
you need a pitch clock.
Yeah, like 1,200 total passing yards. Or so, I mean, those are fantastic. Those are great. I think that's kind of where the Big 12 is going to head. And then every once in a while, every 3-4 years, they're going to have a team that comes out of that unscathed. The Oklahoma State, the TCU, the Arizona State, Colorado. Look, let's not forget. Once Dion gets the recruiting going, that could be a very interesting situation to see what happens with Colorado in that conference if he's able to stay around there. Lots of interesting things in the Big 12. There's great storylines. Jim, I think it's very interesting if all of this would have happened. If all of this would have happened first, do Texas and Oklahoma leave? That's one question. But if Texas and Oklahoma don't leave, does any of this happen?
Yeah, so, it's a chicken and the egg thing.
There were two other big schools on the West Coast that made a move as well, and that certainly helped. Texas and OU moving. And really Texas moving, because OU, as we discussed last year, is broke and needed to do whatever Texas was going to do. And Texas is going to make their money no matter what conference they're in. They had a vehicle, even if the Big 12's TV deal wasn't paying what the SEC or the Big 10 was, Longhorn Network was supplementing some of that. And Texas doesn't suffer for money in many occasions. OU was in a completely different situation with that move, where to remain viably competitive, they were going to have more TV money coming in, because whatever regional Raycom network they had for their third tier rights wasn't paying them they were getting the same money Kansas was. Yeah. And I'm loath to talk about the money of it, but if we're talking about why these moves are happening, that is the reason. Oh, absolutely. You want to be in one of two conferences because those are the two conferences who are making the most money.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. And Oklahoma's an interesting situation. I don't think any of us have any questions that Texas is going to find its legs in the SEC eventually. Maybe not right out of the gate, things will be successful, but I do think that Texas has a foundation for long-term competitiveness and success in the SEC. I'm not certain of the same thing of Oklahoma. Oklahoma feels a lot like Arkansas to me.
I think they feel like Nebraska in the Big Ten. Yep. I mean, really, I think that's a closer analogy than Arkansas, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, Arkansas I would say, yes, I do think the Nebraska analogy is very good. I think back to the early 90s when Arkansas and South Carolina came into the SEC. Both were strong programs from where they were coming from. Arkansas was, Southwest Conference champions, and the only Southwest Conference school not on probation at the time that we left. But there's been no dominance. There's been no SEC championship after that for Arkansas. It's been hard times. A team that was arguably the number 2 team in the SWC behind Texas for the entire run of the conference. Very prideful state, and then you come into the SEC and just have not seen the football success. Yet has been competitive. I think Oklahoma fans, look, suck it up, Buttercup, and take a real hard look in the mirror, because this is your life.
I don't know how Arkansas is about to be on probation, because I'm pretty sure Steve Atwater killed a guy.
Well, yeah, but that didn't happen until it was the NFL and Christian Okoye tried to come through that line.
Whatever. He's a murderer. It's fine.
He hit a bunch of guys hard across the middle. He killed 'em
Allegedly.
every Sunday.
I'm gonna do my mug
So-
shot.
But it kind of brings me to, the other point about this realignment. If the goal is to be in one of these two conferences that are making money, eventually we are, to Jim's point earlier, going to start paring down to some number of schools. I don't know what the math is to figure out who those schools are. Because I pretend I'm at work and play with Excel sometimes and just start pulling data. And I'm looking at things that I think don't matter anymore, that I think some fan bases would be upset about. So if I look at all-time winning schools, either all-time wins or winning percentage, there's a pretty clear top 25, and there's pretty good alignment between those. But then if I look at revenue, that's a whole different group, at least from 10 to 25. And then, I guess the other part of the calculus is donations, how many eyeballs they draw now, because it's not about necessarily, even 12 years ago, the SEC network needed Texas A&M or needed a Texas school to get the Texas television market for what streaming was going to become. And now it's become more about, Oklahoma's more viable in this situation because they have a better television presence. Whereas 12 years ago, nobody cared because you didn't want the state of Oklahoma from a media market standpoint. So I don't know what the right combination of things are, but once you get past like that top 25, it's a whole big mess of schools that would have equally good arguments about being in the haves or the have-nots. And there's a really big line between schools that are making close to, $500,000 in revenue up and then not. And so where does this, in your opinion, where does this end? When does the merry-go-round stop? Back to my original question. Is it 20 teams? Is it 60 teams? Is it splitting off football from the NCAA completely? If I'm Baylor, I raped a guy.
I'm sorry.
Also, but if I'm Baylor, do I keep putting money in football knowing that the reality is I'm probably not one of those teams at the end of the day?
I didn't think about that part of it. We've been talking about, and I think what it is for some reason 32 or 64 sounds right to me, and I do think it splits off from the NCAA altogether. And you might even see realignment with other sports like we talked about that need to be closer together. You might just see them be completely separate things. I didn't really think about the fact that it would disincentivize the teams that are not in that group that gets picked to. I mean, that's a good point, and it's a sad point, but
I don't know that it will. But if you look at, and my stupid calculus means nothing, but reverse rank from revenue, wins, and winning percentage, historic numbers. Arkansas is in, Utah is not, Oregon's not, Georgia Tech is not, Minnesota's not, Boston College not,
wow.
Florida State is not.
Yeah, but if we talk, all-time wins since when? I mean, all-time
means all time.
Again, I don't know if that's part of the calculus.
I mean, but I'm saying
it
can't be, because Penn and Yale and Harvard won a bunch of freaking games.
All right, but you have to still be in Division I. I'll share this spreadsheet.
Fair.
Talk about it in a future.
I think he's talking about a calculus, though, of each thing has a certain weight, all-time wins, but also what money you're making now.
I think the money you care about is what you've made the last 50 years or less. Because all time is just, it's too great for me. I get where you're going though, and I do agree with it. I think it'll be very interesting also.
Hey, we're very proud of our wins from the 40s, so I need you to stop with this.
Are you kidding me? The 1964 national championship we call, trust me, that would be out of the window that I just mentioned. We don't even get to count that. I don't like it at all. I have to count all the terrible years that Arkansas has had since then. But what I do look at, guys, in thinking about that, how much does academics continue to really play in it? I mean, if we finally turn this into pure, does Vanderbilt get left by the side? Does Vanderbilt go the way of Rice? Right? Stanford has done a pretty good job historically of keeping athletics competitive while making the academic.
Notre Dame has also done the same.
Notre Dame, yeah, exactly.
So honestly, Texas and Texas A&M are also highly, highly regarded academic institutions that have also.
But your athletics are carry big enough that you don't have to be part of the concern.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, those are 3 schools in my stupid calculus, which means nothing. I'm fully admitting that. Arkansas is number 21, A&M is number 16, and Texas is number 6.
Yeah, absolutely. And
so it's all our teams are not part of the conversation about who gets left out, I don't believe.
No,
Sure.
but what I do think is that historically you cannot apply common sense to what the NCAA winds up doing. And so that's why where Jim says it should be 32 or 64 teams, and my logical brain goes, absolutely, that makes total sense to me. And that's probably why they won't do that. They'll probably, get some weird number. Here's the other thing I continue to think about. Unless you're going to turn this into something like Premiership football from over in England, where there's a table of 20, right? And then if you're at the bottom, you go to the next leg, and then you come on. You could do that with college football, but if you're not going to do that, then today's number of 64 is going to grow, because you're always going to have some team getting better and some team wanting in your club, right? You have the special club with only a set number of members. Someone's always knocking at the door.
But if the 64 suck all the oxygen out of the room and leave no place for a 65th team to grow, I know we're definitely kicking the football way down the field, but it's interesting. I think it becomes much more of a give me the 64 best, highest drawing, highest rated teams right this very second, and that's who you run with. I don't know that they're going to put any more complicated thought into it.
Well, but even that, I'll give you a weird school to think about. Central Florida. Central Florida didn't exist 30 years ago.
Exactly.
But they've got a lot of alumni. It's a big commuter school. It's what U of H would like to be from a alumni and a donation perspective. And they're kind of on the come from a football perspective. Going to the Big 12 is a giant jump for them, but they're a team that could be positioned really, really well. In any kind of calculus right now, they'd be excluded from that 64.
Yeah. Well, if SMU was truly making a jump to the ACC, like what you're talking about, you want to talk about a team that's stepping into the Lions Den. SMU is not to a point in any sport that I'm aware of where they could compete at an ACC level. So that schools like that are going to get eaten up, chewed out, and spit.
Probably dressage might be the only thing that they're in for.
But for good news for Jim, Baylor is left out of my calculus.
That's all that matters, man.
Yeah, and you see, I just don't.
Along with U of H.
Going back to your original question, I don't think let's use Baylor as the example. I don't think they know that they're a have-not in the example that you laid out. I don't think they are. I think they have enough money and smugness and arrogance, and enough of a tradition, if you will, that they're going to say that they should be in the argument. So they're in my opinion, they're not de-incentivized to do anything, because they don't realize they're going to get left out. I don't think a lot of those schools, it'll never happen to us. Nothing like that's going to happen. Let's keep going. I think they continued pumping money into those sports at the top level, just because habitually that's what they've done. So the law of inertia is on the side of this. Well, and they just don't want to see themselves as being anything less than the best.
Andy and I live with those people. So to quote one of my favorite TV characters of all time, Squirrely Dan, Ken's confirms.
Allegedly.
To be fair.
To that point, there are currently 62 D1 teams that play football that have no chance of ever winning a national championship.
Absolutely.
I mean, like this, by the virtue of their geography or conference affiliation or the fact that they are called Southern Mississippi, they're not going to win a national championship. They keep playing football.
Well, but with expanded playoffs now in the immediate future and a group of 5 opening in there, they, Troy, now more than ever, they have a chance.
Old Dominion is going to play Division I football. They're never winning a national championship.
I agree, but I'm saying now,
what is the end game for that school?
Just think if they did, though. Just think about the Disney movie that's coming out 2 years after that national championship. That would be amazing.
Well, I'm sure
Old Dominion.
I'm sure Ron DeSantis boycotted
going together.
Moving on, because we have a limited time frame today. I wanted to do quick team previews. I'm going to start with Scott on this because he usually has the most to say about the Arkansas Razorbacks. I want to frame it this way. I want to know what your best case scenario for the season is, record wise, worst case scenario, and where you think realistic is.
Yeah, so Arkansas, of course, every year in the SEC, you have road games that concern you. Well, this year Arkansas is drawing the schedule where we get to travel to Oxford, we get to travel to Baton Rouge, we get to travel to Tuscaloosa, and we get to travel to Florida. Florida maybe not so bad, but the rest of those are. Now, here's what I'm going to tell you. What's good on that? Well, Georgia's not on this list this year, so we don't have to play Georgia this year. Thank God. Of the schools that we also don't get any easy breaks in conference. But as I look at this, Arkansas has lost their offensive coordinator and their defensive coordinator, but they've replaced them with a familiar face in Dan Enos on the offense, whose style is much more in line with what Coach Sam Pittman wants to run. There have been reports since the first week that Enos was there of KJ Jefferson getting better. Yes, Andy, because of COVID, he does get an extra year of eligibility. If he wanted to, he could come back next year. Sorry. He didn't create the disease. He's just taking advantage of it.
Didn't he host Steve Atwater on his recruiting trip?
It is funny that you say that because of last year's press conference photo of KJ Jefferson looking exhausted, slumped forward and unhappy, wearing nothing but a wife beater. It looked like Samuel L. Jackson out of Black Snake Moan, man.
Well, man, he's 52 years old. Of course he's exhausted. I'm exhausted.
52, but with a lot of eligibility left.
I got out of bed this morning and that was enough
from necessary roughness. How's that?
Yeah.
But no, I think Arkansas has the only game that I look at and go, you know what? I'm going to say this. There's not a game because Nick Saban does not have a proven quarterback, and the mystique of Nick Saban, it's still really shiny. Don't get me wrong, but the shine has come off a little bit. Arkansas has not beaten Nick Saban. It's not out of the realm of possibility this year. What the offense is going to be predicated on a lot of ball fakes and play movement, getting the ball out of your hand. KJ Jefferson's footwork is improved. Arkansas fans know that he's had terrible difficulty hitting the slant routes and crossing routes through his career with overthrowing and throwing behind receivers as well. That seems to have been fixed. I think the sky is the limit for Arkansas. The best case scenario is an undefeated season. The worst case scenario is probably 6-6 or 7-5, and it's the SEC, so either one of those things could happen. And I think a 9-win season is more in line with what I'm expecting. But you can't expect a team to go play Lane Kiffin, Brian Kelly, and Nick Saban at their place and win all three of those games.
All right, so we're from 6-6 to undefeated with 9-3. Regular season is your goal. We'll revisit this prediction in a few weeks.
Absolutely. And here's the other thing too. One thing Arkansas is building now that you need so much in the SEC and that we have not had historically, but we're building this in the backfield, on the lines. The receiving corps is brand new and they're going to be untested, but they were last year too, and that seemed to work out. But Arkansas is getting depth at important positions, and you need that in the SEC to survive, because the guys you go to battle with in the first game will not all be the same guys you end your last battle with in January.
All right. Jim.
Yeah.
The Texas Longhorns in their farewell tour of the Big 12. Your new commissioner has already said other teams should beat you because they should.
Because
on the way out the door.
I mean, they won the first Big 12, so why not do this thing where they win it on the way out? Look, I actually I think the Longhorns are 10-2. I think that's also probably the ceiling. I think Alabama in their place for as close to that game was, and I know that Quinn Ewers didn't finish it, but and there'll be another slip-up game. I think, but I also think a bad season is 8-4. I feel really good about this team this year. I do think they win the Big 12 and make the playoff, and I think that Quinn Ewers gets to go to New York, is at least invited, and will be drafted in the NFL after this season.
Now he's cut his hair, so he's serious.
Looking sharp.
I mean, Sark has said he's serious because he cut his hair.
Yeah. The scissors in his house are not broken anymore. That's good.
That's how you know. That's how you know.
That's how you know.
when they cut their
How
hair.
much of the record do you believe? I mean, because you're basically calling 10-2 with a conference championship. How much of the record do you believe is Texas being, I hate to use this term, all the way back, and the Big 12 being, let's say, suspect? I would say most national pundits agree Texas has a easier schedule in the Big 12 this year than maybe they've had in the past few years.
Yeah, no, I think that is part of it. I mean, I think, all that TCU team that surprised everybody, most of them graduated. Like, I don't even think TCU fans are necessarily very high on their own squad. I mean, I do think it's part of it, but I also do think that Sark has been very methodical with how he's built the team. I think he's built the team from the inside out, like you're supposed to. Like, it's been about building up the lines first. I think that the skill positions feel really, really strong. I think Quinn Ewers 1 year into the system will be a lot better quarterback. So I definitely think it's a combination of both things. I think the only question about it really obviously is running back, having lost, Bijan Robinson and such. But yeah, I mean, of course it's a combination of all of those things. I just feel like it's been interesting to watch Sark work, because you had Mac Brown, who was very good at doing Mac Brown things. And then you had Charlie Strong, it's the real Nate Dale. And you had Charlie Strong, who, nobody wanted Charlie Strong. I mean, most Longhorn fans wanted it to work with him.
Well, there was a certain wife of a owner at Louisville who wanted Charlie Strong, but that's a different story.
That's a whole different story. And there were some Longhorn donors from San Antonio who didn't want Charlie Strong to work at all. But Tom Herman was a very look at me the entire time he was doing stuff, and it didn't work out. And it's been interesting to watch Sark kind of fly under the radar compared to Tom Herman, and even compared to Mac Brown. So I'm very interested. Nick Saban did point out that he does not coach the Texas Longhorns when asked about whether or not they would be ready for the SEC. But he believes they will be. But yeah, I mean, I'm for as much as I was cautious last year, I am not cautious this year.
I think it's funny, when you put it like that, Jim, you can draw a kind of a correlation with Arkansas and Texas the last decade, because you had Tom Herman, we had Chad Morris, and then we finally come out of those years, both of us, to find somebody that can actually lead the program. I think what you just described is very plausible to have happen to Texas this year. And I think that could be one of the absolute worst case scenarios for the fan base if that happens, because the Texas fan base is going to come out on top of the Big 12 and then step into the SEC. Well, and unfortunately, a lot of fans are going to expect to dominate in the SEC just like they did in Big 12, and it sets expectations.
Longhorn fans are smarter about their team than Astros fans are about theirs. I think a lot of Longhorn fans know, at least from the ones I've spoken to, expect there to be a few steps back for a period of time before they catch up to what the SEC is like. I'm not terribly worried.
Now, but are these the same people, though, that in the moment they're going to still feel that same way? Because I get that they're saying that now, and I know you well enough to know that you're looking at this logically, but
well, I guess it would be no worse for them than any other group. How about that? I don't know that it would be it's going to be something that's unique to them. And maybe I'm just so jaded after watching our other fan base, Andy, completely not understand the game that they're watching. I feel like Longhorn fans are at least a little bit more prepared they're looking forward to the step up in competition, but do know it will be a step up in competition.
And I think the difference there too is a person in real life is a little bit more logical than a person online. As the quote goes, people are stupid. A person can be smart, but people are stupid.
People are stupid.
So, Andy, what about you? What about these Aggies and the test tube of a scientific situation you have down there with your coaching staff?
I think the coaching staff thing is overblown. I think Petrino and Jimbo are going to be fine.
Been saying that all along.
But it's a great story, and the media wants a story, and they want there to be conflict. They want there to be fight, and evidently Petrino is going to be on the field coaching and not from a box. And so if that happens, I am certain there will be a couple of times that the two of them have conversations on the sideline that are going to get blown to hell from a proportion standpoint. If I go back to just everything else, though, that makes a football team win. We should be strong everywhere except the offensive line. And that's my big question. Not that we don't have talent. It's just we haven't played well there in a couple of years. So if Adazio, who we are, Jimbo's evidently running his own coaching rehab program to lesser success than Nick Saban's. But if we can get a competent offensive line, I'm not even talking a great offensive line, just a competent offensive line. I think we have enough skill talent. I think we have enough talent overall on the roster to be a very salty team. I also think that the West, for the first time, is kind of up for grabs. First time in a long time. Alabama is going to be a great team, but I think they are the most vulnerable they have been in a while, because I don't think their skill talent is where it has been. And Saban's even starting to allude to that we're going to go back kind of old school and just start pounding on people. Well, you only do that when you don't trust your quarterback to throw down the field.
But looking at offensive now, looking at how many offenses are kind of, we had explosions and RPOs and all spread it out. Now we're coming back to a little bit more of a traditional play action game in many cases in passing situations. A&M's doing it. I know what Petrino likes to do. Petrino wants to go 3 receiver set with a big back, throw the ball, keep you off balance, and then pound away at you as hard as he can in the fourth quarter to wear you out. That's the Bobby Petrino MO. But looking at this, I wonder almost if we're looking at a change out of the RPO and we're looking at a start of that in college football. And I hadn't thought about that until right now, but all the changes that I'm thinking about seem to be going away.
So, I mean, it's possible. The success of A&M's season is going to be based on whether or not our offensive line plays well. And I think that's the bottom line. And I hate to use that old chestnut, because that's how all football teams generally go. But they've recruited really well. Contrary to what ESPN and some other outlets will tell you, our entire team did not transfer away. As a matter of fact, no starters transferred away. I think one guy who would have been in the 2 deeps transferred away. The rest of them were suspended. And the big 4 talents that people keep talking about, none of them are on their current football rosters. So you've got 3 guys who went to D1 schools who were expected to be starters, who've been kicked off or are in some level of suspension with LSU, Georgia, U of H, and I think one other school. I don't remember. Anyway, so, to answer my own format, this is a team that could win the West. I think LSU is stronger. I think our ceiling is probably like 11-1. I think our floor, unfortunately, we showed what our floor was last year at 5-7. With a little bit of incremental improvement, it's probably more like a 6-7 win team at the worst. I think our reality is more like 9-3, maybe 10-2.
Who do you have out of conference this year? Who does A&M get?
Well, with the mighty Lobos of New Mexico, we open up with next week.
Better than Appalachian State.
We're avoiding App State. That is not a thing on our schedule anymore.
Strongly recommend that.
Week 2 is at Miami in Coral Gables, or in Miami Gardens, and then Louisiana Monroe and Abilene Christian as our.
Well, 3 out of 4 sounds easy. I do think it's kind of cool. This week 0, I believe it is, Miami and Miami play each other. Miami, Ohio, and Miami, Florida.
Hey, no matter what, Miami's going to win.
Book it. That's my DraftKings lock of the week. Miami wins over Miami.
But yeah, I think the schedule, sets up okay. We should be 5-1 going into Alabama, and then it lightens up a little bit. But SEC's tough, so it's kind of hard to predict. At some point we have to get out of our own way. I think one way or another, Jimbo either redeems himself this year or we're looking for a new coach. I mean, if I have a hot take, that's kind of where we are. I don't think an 8-4 season saves him at this point. And it didn't really matter how expensive that gets, because the pressure we're going to put on ourselves with Texas and OU coming into the league next year. You can't afford to get behind in recruiting. You can't afford to be behind in hype. And you can't afford to get too far behind from a production standpoint. So Jimbo either tells a great story this year and things start clicking, or we're looking for a new coach.
So you're saying 8-4 keeps his job, or 8-4 loses his job?
8-4 is the line. 8-4, and I hate that take because 8-4 is one of those things that it depends what the 8-4 looks like, right?
You lose your quarterback, lose the first 3, and finish the last.
Lose 3 offensive
wins.
linemen the first week. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes,
totally.
Which was our story last year, frankly. I mean, we cycled through 3 quarterbacks and like 10 offensive linemen and lost some ridiculous number, like 50+ games to starters. It was a bad season from a lot of different perspectives. It
still beat us.
It probably can't beat. Yeah, well, if you'd pay off the goalposts.
We don't have that kind of money.
Get those foam.
Spending on NIL.
You need those goalposts with the foam that bend a little bit.
Yeah. You ain't kidding, brother. You ain't kidding.
But yeah, it's I'm cautiously optimistic, but if we fall on our face again, I'll have the optimism of having a new coach.
I think
it's a prime job
Southwest,
with a lot of money going behind it, so there's no good reason we should be having a season like we had last year.
I think the Southwest Classic this year is going to be. I think it's going to be fantastic. I think when our 2 teams play, I think we both are loaded up talent wise. We have new systems in. It could be an extremely exciting game to watch.
I tell you what, I am just hoping for the 2024, not because I'm really excited to play the University of Texas or any of that nonsense. I'm tired of playing Arkansas and then having to play Alabama right after that. Usually Alabama has a bye week too.
Yeah. I just hope everyone has fun.
How do I like playing A&M, Ole Miss, and Alabama on consecutive weeks?
We both have shit schedules, Scott, but my problem is that every year you guys have come in and just not win the game necessarily, but physically just beat us up.
Yeah.
And it carries over. And I think that's the big difference when you're talking, Jim, that your fan base is going to have to accept, is that it's a beating every week, and it is a war of attrition at some point.
Yeah.
Because even if Arkansas is down, even if Auburn is rebuilding, they still have these giant guys that are just going to pound on you for 4 quarters. And if you don't have a good 3 deep, you get in trouble towards the end of the season.
Absolutely. Depth is so important in the SEC. I think
it starts building lines. So
yeah, I think it'll be interesting when next year comes around to see the pressure that other teams put on themselves, the Arkansas, the A&Ms, the Missouris, who now their former kindred are moving into the neighborhood. And do we have to pose up, or is it more relaxed? It's going to be really interesting as these teams move in, and just not only to see how does Texas and their fan base handle it, how does Oklahoma and their fan base handle it, but how do some of the SEC schools handle it as well? Should be cool.
I think that's as good a point as it, and as good a place as any to wrap it up. This is the week 0 show of Yell Fight Sooie. We'll be back for at least the next 17 weeks talking all the college football things, and hopefully one of our teams makes the playoffs, and we have to extend the show into January.
I hope so too. I hope we all have fun.
I hope Arkansas makes it too. It'd be nice.
I hope everybody has a good time and enjoys sportsmanship.
Just hope you all play the sports ball to the best of your abilities.
Go sports ball.